Alright, y'all. So today I want to review Batman Year One, the animated film. This film came out all the way back in 2011 and is a adaptation of Frank Miller's famous graphic novel Batman Year One. So going into this, I kind of came from a unique perspective because number one, at the time I'm making this video, this movie is kind of pretty accessible to watch. And also, I really actually haven't read Batman Year One. I know what happens in it to a general degree, but I actually haven't read the comic. So I came in with a little bit of an interesting perspective here. That being said, I've also kind of looked at other people's opinions of it, and I did watch it for myself. And it's a pretty short watch. It's only an hour long, and I gotta say that overall, it's an alright movie. Now, I wouldn't call it great. I wouldn't even call it underrated like some people have said it was. There's many aspects of this that I think, personally speaking, are not inherently an issue of adapting it. It's more of they went so literal with the adaptation that it kind of hurts it, and it's more of an issue on Frank Miller and how he wrote his story than really the adaptation here. And I'm going to be frank here. I thought The Dark Knight Returns was a better animated film than this. But that being said, I didn't hate this thing. It's not horrible. It's not one of the worst superhero DC things I've ever seen. It's just a little bit lackluster. But I'm going to get into my pros, my cons, and get into Batman Year One. Now, if you don't know what Batman Year One is, to give you a general description, it basically covers the first year of Batman's career in Gotham. We get to see Bruce Wayne arrive in Gotham. We get to see him figure out his secret identity, the Batman persona, him just starting to figure out crime fighting and starting to make a difference in Gotham. We also see Selina Kyle, and we get to see her being somewhat inspired by it all to become Catwoman and the start of her career. We also see James Gordon, who just is like a transferring cop from another department, gets going to Gotham, and basically how he becomes, not commissioner, but basically forms a relationship with Batman, fights against corruption, and in general starts to make more of a change in Gotham. And they also kind of throw some teases for other future characters, like I think the Joker is mentioned, if I remember correctly. Commissioner Loeb is also here, and some other characters. So to start out with the pros, I think the voice cast it got for this thing was phenomenal. The highlight of this by far, Bryan Cranston, yes, Walter White himself actually plays James Gordon in this. He voices him. And he's the standout performance in this. And to be honest with you, one of my criticisms of this is that it's not really a Batman story. It's more of a James Gordon origin story than it is a Batman story, weirdly enough. But regardless, Bryan Cranston does a really good job. And, most things he's in, usually, he does a great job. He always gives his A performance. But he does a great job here. It only kind of makes me wish, I think he honestly would have been I think he would have been a good Lex Luthor, but I also think he would have been a really good James Gordon. Gosh. James Gordon. Why did I say James Gordon? But you know what I mean. He would have been a good Gordon. There's also some other characters, too, that do some good performances. The actor who plays Batman is decent enough. The actress who plays Selina Kyle, or voices her, does a really good job. And overall, really great, stellar voice cast. The animation is also really good. It's kind of in line with other animated films that came out around this time from DC, but it's got a good style, and like I said, I did compare and contrast some of the panels here from the original graphic novel to this animated film, and I mean, yeah, it looks like the comic book, and its design, its aesthetic, how Batman looked like in that graphic novel, it looks very similar here, and I gotta really appreciate that. They basically nailed the visual look of it. And I think the performances, the action scene, the way it's animated, I think, for me personally, I thought it was pretty good. The story itself, too, is decent. It's a really short animated movie, but it's decent. It's okay. I prefer The Dark Knight Returns. I think that's a way more better and more epic story. But, like I said, there's many aspects of this graphic novel too that I can totally see future Batman writers and of course other artists would eventually use as their inspirations, and like Nolan would use on Batman Begins and such. And like I said, I like all the Batman stuff that's here. I like all the Jim Gordon. Sorry, why do I keep saying James Gordon? Do not like that dude. I like, like I said, his stuff is pretty cool too. But now I'm going to get into some of my cons with this animated film. And it's not necessarily, it's so faithful in its adaptation. It's more of just a flaws of the original story, which is, it's not really a Batman story. We barely get any Batman in this. I mean, he's more of a side character in his own animated movie. Jim Gordon is like basically the main character. We get to see him get transferred. We have a weird part of the movie where he has an affair, and that kind of goes nowhere. There's some parts where he's like battling corruption in the police department. And then initially, of course, he's like, we got to stop the vigilante Batman. And then he eventually comes to terms with him at the end. And it's kind of a strange relationship because it kind of comes out of nowhere. Now, I'm not sure if it's built better in the comic, but to me, like when you say at the end, like, oh, Gordon's going to meet with this Batman, it feels really strange and forced. It doesn't feel natural like it does like in the Nolan movies. It's just really strange and confusing. And like I said, it's not a huge aspect of it I hate, but it's just, like I said, this should be a Batman-centric story. Gordon should be taking more of a side character role, and Batman should be, we should be the one following his career, his beginnings as a superhero. And there's been many other comics that have done the origin story of Batman better than, honestly, Batman Year One. I just think it's a big criticism of this comic, and also, like I said, in a way, the animated film as well. So I'm more of a focus on Batman, less forced ideas and stuff. I mean, I think most of it came natural, like all the Gordon stuff, except the Batman part, felt natural in its origin story. Batman, like I said, we barely get to see him, but what's there works. Catwoman, I think, worked too, but like I said, it all doesn't come together in a nicely packaged origin story, and it doesn't hurt that, for whatever reason, we're getting such a huge focus on Gordon, which is really not helping things. And yeah, that's my huge criticism with this, animated film, and I guess in a lot of ways the comic. It needs to be more of a Batman film, not a Jim Gordon story. But yeah, that's my thoughts on Batman Year One. I'm gonna kind of quickly wrap up this review. It's a decent animated film. If you like the comic, you'll probably love this animated adaptation. Plays it very literal. But, in a lot of ways that kind of hurts it too, just because comics are paced differently than animated films. And I think it kind of hurts because, like I said, when you're adapting something, you can't exactly rip it off from the page. You got to take some creative liberties in its pacing, how it positions scenes. For example, I think Zack Snyder's Watchmen, with a lot of issues that movie has, and there's a lot, it kind of handles that more faithful adaptation a little bit better. But yeah, my thoughts on Batman Year One from 2011. Hope you all have a good day and peace, y'all.